What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Inflow Experience, a strategic podcast for unified communications and contact center success, and also some other cool stuff. I'm Tarek Sabasic, your Inflow CSM. Shout out to all my customers and clients watching, and also host of this podcast. Today's guest, Alex Lustig from Observe.AI. Alex, how you doing?
Hey, Tarek. Doing good. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, my man. Wanted to first and foremost, obviously take the time and thank you for jumping on the pod. Tell me a little bit, sort of, where you reside today. I took a peek at your LinkedIn profile and it said Tampa. Is that correct? Are you out there in Florida?
I am in Florida. I just moved down here, so I'm actually in St. Petersburg. So Tampa is at the top of the bay. St. Petersburg, similar size city, below on the peninsula here. But yeah, just moved down here about 2 months ago and absolutely loving it.
Where did you move from?
So came from New Jersey, was there for about 5 months, and that was just a little stint in between. I was in California for the bulk of last year. Actually moved there just before the pandemic, so moved to work for Observe.AI out of San Francisco and got about 2 weeks or so in the office before we were back on lockdown, or started lockdown, I should say, and then really out in San Francisco for most of last year, but back to New Jersey, which is really home for me. So back with family for a little bit as I decided the next step, and then decided to move down here.
Gotcha. Pretty decent difference in weather as far as New Jersey and Tampa are concerned.
Yeah, it's really been
pretty high ends of the spectrum.
It's been something, yeah, really adjusting here. I've been trying a couple of things to adjust, and the one thing that I've done is not run air conditioning during the days. And all my coworkers tell me that this is absolutely the most insane thing they've ever heard. But I'm like, no, it's the process. Like, if I can just get used to it, eventually it'll get better. And it's been about 6 weeks of that, and I don't think it's getting much better.
Okay, so run me through that. What's the idea behind not running air conditioning during the day?
Yeah, so the thought here is that much in the same way that you can acclimate to being outside in the cold, if you're simply just have enough exposure to it, my thought is that if I'm just at a state of uncomfortably hot, eventually my body will match that, and I won't have to work as hard to stay cool. And some days it feels like it's actually working. And then there are days like today where I'm just like, I don't think it's really doing anything. So I'm hoping that I can just acclimate. And if my body thinks it's normal enough where it's not just always exposed to air conditioning, I can actually make some headway here.
I like it. We're getting scientific. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
How many times have you had to bail on that plane and turn on the AC during the day? I gotta know.
Today, at least once, I did turn it on for this, but it'll depend. It'll just depend on the kind of day. It's been kind of cloudy and just a little muggy here lately. So when it gets humid, I think that's when you really have to. I don't feel as much of a need if it's just hot and a little bit drier. But once you get to that 80+% humidity point, it is very, very difficult to stay true to that idea.
Gotcha. Did you go to school in New Jersey, or did you go somewhere else? What does that sort of look like on your end?
Yeah, it's a great question. So as far as schooling for me, I studied psychology in a small school in New Jersey called Monmouth University. So really pretty school right on the Jersey Shore. I had a great time there. And while I was there, I actually studied abroad and went to southern Spain. Loved the experience so much that I said, I really knew I wanted to get a master's degree. I didn't quite know what form that would take or really where that would be. And then so I got my master's degree in communications in Barcelona. So I was there for a little bit over a year. And basically the program was a full native Spanish communications program. So all the materials, all the lessons, all the papers and topics and subjects, all of that was in Spanish with native students. And so a bit of an unorthodox schooling experience, but truly one of the best experiences I've had.
Wow, so you spent a whole year out in Barcelona?
Yeah, that's correct.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Did you get to partake in any of their quote-unquote traditions? And I'm more asking about the soccer team than anything else. I know they're pretty crazy over there, but any traditions that you want to pass along that you thought were super interesting?
I didn't get to do much as far as the football went over there, but I can tell you that just living there and seeing the way that the children play soccer, it is truly part of their culture. And so I think that's one of the coolest part. You could go to any city square or park or green space or whatever it happens to be, and it is just in their blood. It is truly in their DNA to just be playing soccer at any point. They'd all have the Barcelona shirts on, and it was something I just thought was so cool. I can't think of any singular sport that has taken hold in America in quite the same way now, but to see that and to see their passion for it was just like, that was really my soccer experience, and I love that.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting that you bring that up, because I'm from a small country in Europe where, very, very remote. It's not the greatest as far as economy is concerned. And I remember, I was born and raised there, and we go back every other summer or so. But every time we go back, right, it's the same thing. They may not have clothes on their back or even shoes to wear, but somehow, some way, they've crafted a soccer field with 2 goals, and you could always find a place to play. And you make a good point there about there's not really that sort of, I don't want to say obsession. I to me, it's more of a religion in those countries. The sport is, and I just haven't really seen that. Basketball is huge in the States, so is football, but there really isn't that sort of, I don't know how to really explain it, that obsession with the sport like you see other places with soccer. It's just completely 2 different things.
It's so true. It's so true. And I think that what makes it so interesting in somewhere like Spain, for instance, is that it's so singular. Where I think in the U.S. we are brought up having more of a multitude of hobbies approach, where you try a little bit of everything, a couple different sports, a couple different hobbies, and so it gets spread out a little bit. Where something like soccer, it's almost like everything goes into that, and that's what I thought was so interesting there. And you see such ability coming from these kids that are single-digit years old because of that.
Absolutely. So that's actually really cool. I didn't know that you spent some time out in Barcelona. That's actually very, very interesting. I want to maybe change the tune here and jump to a different topic. Tell me a little bit about kind of how you got to Observe AI, maybe some roles that you were in previously that maybe led you to Observe, and sort of where your thought was before you got to where you're at today.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I just got out of school and I had gotten out of Barcelona, what I did was I went to work for a Microsoft partner, so a startup out of Australia, and really started off very basic work there as a sales development representative. So, making 100 calls a day, sending emails, booking meetings, things like that, which what I think was a great intro into sales. And so from there, got acquainted with some sales engineers there and eventually started to pick up some of that work. And so while I was there, met a few people. One of the people that I met, his name's Pete Lee, and he's currently the vice president of sales at Observe. And so we had done some really great work together. And then eventually, Pete and I got to talking. He told me about this great thing that he was doing at Observe.AI. So it was a whole different technology stack, a whole different industry, and this was something that I just really wanted to know about. I loved the Observe.AI vision. I loved the product, and I loved that they had this AI and machine learning component to all of it that tied it all together. And so one thing led to another, wound up talking to Observe.AI and got brought on as a sales engineer. And so that's what I've been doing since. Absolutely love it, and couldn't recommend that enough.
Sometimes it's not necessarily what you know, it's who you know, right? And it sounds like that played a little bit of a part there. I took, like I said, I peeked at your LinkedIn profile, and pre-sales solutions consultant.
Yep.
Tell me, unpack that a little bit for me. I know, obviously in our space, it's a pretty loose term thrown around, but for those out there that might not necessarily know what that would be, give them a little in-depth look at what that title means.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what really pre-sales is the way that I think of it is more of a technical sales role, right? So if you think of any company selling a product or a service, right, you're going to have that salesperson, and they're going to be able to have a certain level of knowledge, a certain depth of knowledge when it comes to whatever that product or service is. And they can comfortably talk within a certain range there. If it gets any deeper than that, that's when you'd bring in someone like a pre-sales consultant, someone like myself or people on our team. And essentially what we do is make sure that the clients are comfortable with our product from a technical perspective, that they understand any of the outlying questions they have. Maybe it's integrations, maybe it's support, maybe it's how do we get data, maybe it's how do we store data, all these different things where if we need to go a level deeper than would just be traditional sales knowledge, that's essentially where we get brought in.
Gotcha. It makes a ton of sense to have sort of that overlay between the sales and where it's kind of brought in, and kind of quote unquote onboarding, right? You got that like nice spot in the middle that I think fits really well, because there's a lot of customers out there that do need that sort of in-depth look, and they do need things vetted a little bit further than just the original sales cycle, right? So it makes a ton of sense. As far as sort of, and I don't mean to put you on the spot when I say this, but what's the next move for you as far as that position is concerned? Are you looking to go more down the solutions architect, engineer, and stay technical, or is the sales side more appealing to you? I'm only interested in this because we talk to one side of the house, which is the engineering technical side, and then we'll talk to the sales side. So we don't really get that sort of exposure into someone like yourself, who's a little bit in the middle. So which way do you lean as far as maybe where you look at future goals and what the job entails compared to what you're doing now? Which one's more appealing to you?
Yeah, I really like that question. And so I think the interesting thing about it is it's what makes the sales engineer role so unique to begin with, because usually if people are really good at sales, they go into account executive roles. If people are really good at anything technical, they'll go into those technical roles. And so what does that leave? Like, what does that mean for a position like mine or the position of the people on my team? I think it means we have a pretty balanced skill set. And I find real value in being able to bridge the gap between the two, being able to essentially take sales talk and then be able to relay that to the technical teams, or vice versa, take that technical talk and make sure the salespeople understand how to sell whatever it is that they're selling. So I really want to stay in this split between sales and tech and sales engineer, essentially. I spent a lot of last year in particular working on the tech side of what we do. So Amazon Web Services has a lot of certifications. So I got 2 really big certifications last year, got the solution architect certification and their security specialty. That for me was a big step, because I'm probably a little bit more on the communication sales side than I am on the technical side. And that was something when I was hired, I really knew was a deficiency. And I knew if I could get that stronger, I would be a lot better at my job. So 2020, in addition to being a year of many things, it was the year of Amazon Web Services, but more specifically learning how tech works at a deeper level. And so I want to continue to strengthen that technical side. But I think a lot of my training this year has been and will continue to be more on the sales, relationship, making impressions, driving really impactful presentations. I mean, I think that's where my focus is going to be. So I like to alternate a little bit, but ultimately I want to grow both skill stacks in conjunction with one another.
Gotcha. And it makes a lot of sense. I think, with the way you sort of look at the position, I can see a ton of value being added in that sort of deeper knowledge, right? Not just that surface knowledge per se. So that's really good to hear. I think I want to dive obviously much deeper into Observe.AI. I know that I've worked a few deals with your internal team there. What you guys do is very, very I don't want to say fine-tuned, because that leaves a little bit room for lack of imagination, I guess, when you say something's finished. But from what I've seen, as far as the platforms that are offered today, I think Observe.AI is definitely up there with some of the top offerings. So I'll put that there, and then kind of lead you into it in the sense of what's, I guess, I don't want to say mission statement, right, because that's a little bit of a loose term, but sort of position Observe.AI for us, for somebody that maybe doesn't necessarily know what we're talking about, just tuned into the pod and turned us on, and he's hearing or she's hearing Observe.AI. What would you give me the elevator pitch, and then we'll dive in and peel that a little bit further.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially what Observe.AI is a speech analytics solution for the contact center. And we're going to break down every one of those pieces so that anyone listening to this from a 101 level to a master level will be able to understand Observe.AI. And so essentially think of something like a call center, right? Some large organization with a lot of agents receiving hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of calls every day, week, whatever it happens to be. How do you actually make sure that the quality is there? How do you make sure those calls are compliant? How do you understand what people are calling about, or where in that process things are breaking down or going very well? There's a lot of questions you're going to get when it comes to the quality aspects, the compliance aspects, all these different use cases that you may have when it comes to understanding this data. Essentially what Observe.AI is going to do is help you to understand that data. So what we do is we take not just calls from the contact center, but we'll take all kinds of different customer interactions. So things like text, emails, web chats, phone calls. We'll take all that in. We're going to process all of that, which means we're going to run machine learning over it. If it's the case of something like a phone call, we're going to transcribe it at really, really high transcription accuracy. We're going to pull out key points of interest, what we call moments in the platform. And we're going to make this data very easy to interact with, both at a high level, if we're talking about millions of interactions, or at a very, very finite level. Maybe we're only looking at a single call. And then really the idea from there is, as we understand this data, right, as we have something like a call transcribed, as we have these points of interest on all these customer interactions that we can filter through and very easily view, that we can take this data and make it super actionable. So now that we understand what's happening in these interactions, that we can take this data, make it actionable, and improve the agent performance, improve the performance of the people who handle these interactions in a very concrete, transparent, and objective way. So that's really what Observe.AI is at a high level.
Gotcha. So, I guess to not necessarily, I don't want to say sum it up because that might be selling a little bit short, but for the most part, right, call analytics, diving down that sort of second and third layer of information. Do me a favor and maybe, give me 1 or 2 points or 3 points if you have it. What are some differentiators between Observe.AI and some of the competition that you guys see as far as the analytics field is concerned, and then maybe the industry as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'm going to point to 3 here that are really key. One is going to be we transcribe, we take in, we process all of that 100% of interactions. So the way that a lot of competition will work is you'll essentially pay for the amount of data that is processed. So Tarek, let's say you have a contact center and I could say, hey, we'll process 10% for this much, 20% for this much, 30% for that much, right? But it gets too expensive after a point. We're going to take in 100% no matter how many interactions there are. And we're able to do this because we're fully cloud native. So we can scale up, we can scale down as needed and process these really big workloads. So you can have 100% insight and transparency into your contact center. The second point is going to be, for something like a call, it's going to be transcription accuracy. So most every competitor of ours uses third-party transcription services. So essentially they're sending their calls out for transcript to a company like Google or Amazon or even Microsoft, right? There are a bunch of these other third-party transcription services that are really, really good. The problem is they're expensive, but more than that, their accuracy isn't that good because when you take low-quality call center audio and run that through a really high quality transcription engine like Google or Amazon, the return is not very good. You're talking 50, 60% sometimes. We've built our own transcription engine. We actually hired the lead architect who designed the Samsung Bixby voice assistant. So that's like the voice assistant on the Samsung phones, similar to like a Siri. And we have made our own transcription engine so that we're able to guarantee accuracy at 80% or over. And we've seen well beyond 80%. So the accuracy is a big one. The real point here is that the accuracy is what all those insights, all those points of interest, all that analytics is based off of. So if you're having poor accuracy coming in, all the data that you extract is naturally going to be lacking and incorrect. So garbage in, garbage out. But we guarantee that accuracy so you know that the data you're getting is really good. The last point is going to be sentiment analysis. So this is a really big one for us because the way that we measure sentiment, which is essentially what does someone mean when they say something, let's say on a call, for instance, the way that we measure that is not only what they say, but how they say it. So if I say something like, Tarek, I just want to pay my bill. Or I say, Tarek, I just want to pay my bill. And the tone changes there's a different pitch, there's a different inflection. Well, that's very different. But on a transcript, it just looks like, Tarek, I just want to pay my bill. So we've actually trained our machine learning models to detect sentiment based on everything from where things come up in a conversation, what was said before, what was said after, the actual words that were said, and then the tone and the pitch there. And so that's why our sentiment detection is actually an industry high accuracy when it comes to being able to find what the customer wants, what they're intending to say when they do say something. So we're running that on every single second of every call that we get, every interaction that we get from our customers.
Wow, you nailed it. You gave me 3 points and I only asked for 2. I promise to those listening out there that these are not pre-scripted questions. This is not something that we're just teeing up as home runs. Alex is just that good, apparently. You mentioned there a little bit, Alex, about you guys do those three things really well, and you mentioned industry standards a little bit. What would you say to a customer that's, let's say they're completely brand new to the call analytics, even call recording, right? But they know that they want to maybe somehow streamline their QA, or maybe their sales team needs to reflect numbers a little bit better, and they need to find out the why. What would you say to those customers that are super new to the space and just don't know where to go, right? What would be like the sort of how would they get into an Observe AI? Would Observe AI be a good platform for them? Do you guys have a niche sort of market size you're looking for? What does that look like on your guys' end?
Yeah, I'd say when it comes to a market size, I mean, we work with everyone from very small 50, 100 seat companies all the way up to massive, what are called BPOs, or essentially call center outsourcers, right? Where you're talking thousands, tens of thousands of agents, right? So our ideal company size is really of any size that there's a significant amount of data such that no human being can manually understand it. Right now, what the scale is past that, we'll be able to take on most anything. And again, that comes back to us being cloud native, us being able to process all of that data. So that's going to be the first part, I'd say, as far as our ideal client size. Now, when it comes to something like a customer, a client, someone who's new to speech analytics, right? What's the value for them? In a lot of ways, it's going to be the same value that someone who was using an older, more obsolete speech analytics tool would be using. It's going to be the ability that we can process data extremely quickly, that we can take in 100% of those interactions. And I think a big part of our platform, and this is something that especially customers who are new to speech analytics want to know, is that you're able to customize so easily within the platform. So for instance, let's take something like creating a new point of interest. Maybe you want to track when customers are talking about canceling their subscription to something on calls. Well, if you're in a lot of the legacy platforms, that's nothing short of a full-blown development task. And a lot of customers who haven't even used speech analytics, they still know this. They know that it's going to be really difficult to program some of these things when it comes to the conditional logic and rules and all this manual effort that has to be put in. What we've really done is optimized our platform so that, just like you're saying, a customer new to speech analytics is very comfortably able to come in, create something new. We'll help assist that as well. We even have functionality in the platform for that, so that the customers are able to do everything from creating their own teams, creating their own points of interest, making new roles, assigning permissions, things like that. All of that is able to be done within the platform. So that's a big thing we'll hit on when it comes to new customers, or new prospects, I should say, who haven't been in that speech analytics space.
Gotcha. Yeah. You used the word there, customizable, and I think that's a really, really good phrase to use when we're discussing someone like an Observe AI. I want to also touch a little bit on your guys' internal teams, as far as the sales process goes, your engineers, and then also the support team. A lot of companies, when they come to a larger size of a customer base, right? You usually get an instance where you gain in customers and you lose that bandwidth. So what does loss of bandwidth mean? That depends. Are we losing bandwidth on the support side, on the sales side, right? There's going to be a miss somewhere. My interactions with Observe I've not seen that at all. Jamie Oliver has been very, very very good at her job, I guess, probably a good way to say it. And then I've talked with Jay. Talk with some of the other folks on the Observe AI team as well. Tell me a little bit about sort of what your support team looks like. What kind of customer expect when they get to Observe? Is there multiple touches? Is there a CSM? What's that look like on the customer side?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to, let's just take a client, or a prospect, I should say, from the very beginning to them being adopted, trained, comfortable within the platform, and essentially sufficient. So when it comes to a prospect who's involved, so someone who's not a customer yet, that's where I'm going to come in. So it's going to be an account executive, essentially a sales rep, myself. We're going to be in there doing everything from giving the demos, answering their questions, running trials, what we call a proof of value, and taking them through that whole cycle. Now, all the while, we're going to be gathering information from that customer that will be useful in the next steps when it comes to their onboarding. So we're going to be collecting everything from their use case, to the contact center platform that they're using, to the different stakeholders on their side and how they're important. So that entire time we are assembling the business requirements for that client. And we're getting that through the sales cycle. So some of it we'll be able to get in the middle, some we'll get a little more in the beginning, some will be more towards the end. So we're gathering all of these business requirements from the client. Now, once a client signs with us, essentially what happens is we have an internal handover where we meet with our onboarding team. And what we're going to do is we're going to get the onboarding team members who are going to be involved in that deal to get that customer live. So the main goal of the onboarding team is to get the customer trained up and live and using the tool. So we're going to have that meeting with our onboarding team. We're going to go through and go over their use case. We're going to make sure that the onboarding team understands what the integrations will look like. Any of the technical details, any of the sales details, we already have documented, and we're just going to make sure we get that information. Then the client gets handed over to our onboarding team. We do a bit of an introduction. From there, the onboarding team is going to do a few things. They're going to train the clients and anyone on their side. These could be quality analysts, these could be supervisors, directors, anyone who's going to be using the Observe.AI platform. They're going to get that white glove treatment. We're going to make sure we train them. We're going to train everyone on their side who's going to have contact with the Observe.AI platform. So that's really the onboarding role. Now, once the onboarding has done this, they get the Observe.AI instance live. Calls, customer interactions are all coming in. From there, that's going to get handed off to the customer success manager. So at that point, they'll have a dedicated customer success manager, and they're going to be really there for the long-term support. So any requests, any long-term issues, if there is any extenuous, training or something like that, anything that happens to come up, we're going to be able to help on the customer success side of things. So really, it goes from, again, sales, pre-sales, my role, to onboarding, who will get the customer live and trained up, the customer success is going to maintain that relationship, also notify them of any new features, changes, things like that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Observe AI process that you guys have implemented internally. I think it's one that I don't want to say guarantees no misses, but because you can never use that word, right? Guarantee is, in our industry, there's very few things that are guaranteed. But what I want to say in that breath is, there's a lot of overlay that happens, especially when a customer is being kind of transitioned from team to team internally. And I think you guys have done a fantastic job of making sure that process is as streamlined as possible. So kudos to you guys on that. I wanted to dive a little bit into obviously some COVID things and some COVID terms. I know you guys, for what you have done, as a company, the locations and quote unquote the in-office work. How has that been, impactful for you personally? As far as COVID goes, have you had any changes that you had to make as far as the day-to-day goes, and also the work life as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and I think it's an important one to discuss. I would say I'll answer it from the work perspective first and then get a little more into the personal side of things. So from a work perspective, I think what made it so hard was I had started work at Observe right at the end of January. It was one of the last days of January when I moved out to San Francisco with all my stuff, ready to spend the foreseeable future working next to my current manager, Christian Wathney, there. So the idea there was I was starting at a little bit more of a junior sales engineer role, that I'd be able to work with him every day and really get that almost mentorship, that training, hands-on, literally working right next to somebody. And so that was, again, great for about, I want to say 3 to 4 weeks, however long it wound up being until we were locked down. So I think it was hard starting a job in such a new space for me, as far as like the tech stack we were using. To do that remotely was initially quite tough in the beginning, but we had a great team, have a great team, but great team at the time to help support that, to help make sure that we were well resourced. So that was something, I think, from a work perspective that was initially quite difficult. One thing that I found, a little side project that I've taken up at Observe, is every new hire that starts, at least within the United States, I book a 30-minute call with them just to get to know them. I set no agenda. I don't send them any questions or say, hey, we have to talk about work. And I talk with every new employee in the U.S. that comes through. And those conversations range from everything from their family to all stuff about my job to their hobbies to you name it. I think I've had the conversation probably at least a few times. And so I find that to be really interesting, because I've found that the new hire experience, it doesn't matter what company you work for. I mean, that's hard enough when you're in the office, but if you're starting remote and you don't even get that first 2 weeks in the office, I mean, that's just a really hard situation. So I've seen that where it's harder to bond with your coworkers. I mean, thankfully I had those first couple weeks to get to meet everybody in person. But I can really feel for those people who started, let's say, over the summer or even going into the fall, winter of last year. So I think it's a big part from the personal side of things, just that I've seen with work that I've been able to experience. So I've tried to make that experience as best as I can, at least from a personal perspective, for the new people that are starting, just so they don't feel so alone as you would in your first couple weeks starting remote. On a fairly unrelated note, I'm currently standing right now, but I'm standing on an under-desk treadmill. So if you picture a treadmill without the upper part, just the mat part of the treadmill, that is what I'm standing on right now. It is obviously not going. And I have a homemade desk that is right in front of me because it's the only thing with a large enough surface area to fit all of my goodies on here. So when I'm working during the day, I can get anywhere from 6 to 8 miles or so of walking just by taking internal meetings, writing emails, things like that. I try not to use it for any kind of customer meeting or anything. Still don't quite know where that fits on the acceptability work from home situation, but this has been really great. This is probably one of the biggest changes to my work. Instead of sitting all day, I'm able to walk, I'm able to stand. Again, most of the time the treadmill is moving. It's a lot of fun. Getting to type while you walk is very hard for the first week or so. So I challenge anyone to try to do that. Very, very difficult. I still have times where I'm like, I can't do it today. But so that's a little bit from the professional side. Yeah, from the personal side, I think for me, it has been a real reminder of how important the social component is of our life. And I mean, the key thing, the most important thing to, I think, all of us in life are our relationships in whatever form they take, familial, romantic, work, whatever it'll be. People are the most important thing in our life. And I think COVID has been a great reminder of that. I found myself during the initial to mid stages of lockdown, I think a little bit more isolated and, very easy to get in that routine of wake up, sit at the counter, go to work, maybe exercise during the evening, watch a movie and go to bed, right? Very easy to get in that routine. And I think I stayed in that for a good bit. And coming down here, moving to St. Petersburg, I've been a little bit better on the social front. So just joined a running club here and actually about to join a swim club. So finding more enjoyment in these activities where I don't know if I would have prioritized that as much before. And this is something that I just think is really, really important, that we focus on the relationships, the social component of life. And I think COVID has reminded all of us how important that is, right? That it isn't something we should take for granted. And I'm as guilty of that as anybody, right? That it's just so easy to take some relationships for granted, some situations for granted, and we absolutely shouldn't, right? We should value those every day. And I think COVID has given us all a pretty good reset and all a good opportunity to get those things back in our life as we want them.
Absolutely. There's a ton there to peel back. I want to start with that ludicrous statement you just made about walking 6 to 8 miles a day. That is absolutely absurd, my friend.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, it's very strange. I mean, I live in a studio apartment here, and this desk setup, because the treadmill is under it, takes up about maybe a quarter or so of the actual square footage here, because the desk is so massive and then the treadmill sticks out about 2/3 of the way. And it is definitely an adjustment. One of the interesting things that I certainly wouldn't have thought is, depending on how fast you walk, is how easily you can concentrate. So walking at 3 miles an hour, you can concentrate quite well. Walking at 3.5 miles an hour, much more difficult to type, and not even just physically, actually just thinking, because you're spending more time focusing on the walking. So I've learned certain paces for different things. If I'm on an internal meeting, I can walk about 3.3. If I'm on a meeting I ever have to speak, I'm never going to go above 3 miles an hour. And if it's something where I just need to trot along, 2.5 works okay. So I found these different thresholds for when it's acceptable to use different speeds. So that'll depend on how many miles I can get through the day, is what kind of meetings I have.
Wow. So not only do you walk and talk at the same time and get exercise in during your meetings, this is actually down to a science for you. Like, you've gotten this down to where you know how fast you can walk pertinent to what you need to say, the discussion, etc.
Yeah, it's a personal science, but it's yeah. I try to think I've taken a bit of a quantitative approach to it for
I'm sorry.
sure.
I'm sorry that I'm so mind blown right now. There's probably people out there listening to this, like, dude, what do you? Why are you so amazed? He's walking and talking. People
Yeah.
have that all the time. But I can't get over the fact that you walk 6 to 8 miles a day. I mean, you work 8 to 10 probably, right? And then you walk 6 to 8. I mean, you're like a Lance Armstrong of the the solutions engineering world. It's pretty crazy.
Wow, thank
There,
you.
there is honestly. I do want to. I'm sure Mike Doloff, our chief revenue officer, will watch this. But if he doesn't, I'm definitely going to tell him about this because Mike is definitely known as a guy at Inflow that if you go on a meeting with him, just know that you're going to be going on a walk. Right, you're going to be getting a walk in. He's the kind of guy to go and bike anywhere from 10 to 15 miles just because, right? So I think he's definitely going to find some interest in this, and he's probably going to have a few questions for you. So if you get an email from Mike, just know it's definitely going to be pointed to this topic for sure. But I did also want to touch on a little bit what you mentioned there about the personal side of COVID, right? Making sure that we're keeping the relationships intact, and it's not very easy to do once you get into a routine, especially when it's in times like this where it's not very easy to get out of that routine. I think it's invaluable to kind of shoot that message across and let people know that this isn't something that's like necessarily down to a quote unquote a science, right? There isn't an exact way to do all this, right? We haven't in my lifetime, I haven't experienced something like this, and I'm sure most people would say the same. So just knowing that it's not necessarily about finding out what's perfect, but what's perfect for you, right? What's going to get you out of your funk? What's going to and it does have to be like you said, it does have to be a big change, right? You go from waking up, working, exercising, sleeping to maybe waking up, exercising in the morning, working, maybe you catch a game with a friend, or you grab a beer, or even virtually, right? You get on a few meetings with a couple of friends and watch the ball game. There's a tons of different ways out there, and I think that's just a very important point to make, that it's not necessarily what's perfect, it's what's perfect for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. It's everyone has to find out what it is that they want to do and just set those goals and not try to boil the ocean, right? Not try to do everything in one day, 1 week, even 1 month. Just try to do a little bit, make a weekly goal. One day this week I'm going to do X, something that I haven't done or something that I've been wanting to do but for whatever reason haven't. I think that's the best way to go about it. And that's certainly what I've been trying to do, and still have a ways to go, but that seems to help me get on that track where I want to be.
No, absolutely. To change the tune a little bit here, I wanted to talk about the sort of the partnership and the relationship that Inflow has with an Observe AI, and not necessarily maybe just Inflow, but partners in general as far as Observe AI is concerned. How do you guys what's a good partner for you? If there was an outline of what an ideal partner looks like, right? What are some things that you guys look for when working with an Inflow or any other partner in your guys' space?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I mean, I think partnerships will vary in the form that they take. Certainly, in the industry that we're in, right? So, we have a lot of partnerships with CCaaS platforms or contact center providers, right? So, you could think of the TalkDesk, the Genesys, the Five9s, the UJets, companies like that, where they're simply able to provide that telephony service. We can attach onto that as this quality piece. So, there's going to be that kind of a partner. There are going to be some partners that we would look for more on the analytics side. Other partners will be more of the referral base, right? They'll bring us into a deal, we'll bring them into a deal. So I think we'll have a variety of partners and the forms that they'll take and the roles that they'll play within Observe. I mean, I think a good partner is just anyone who we're able to work with, who wants to be part of the team, who really, again, values that open communication, wants to make the client experience better. So I'd say that's really what we're looking for from a partner perspective.
I think that's fair. And one thing I'll touch on that partner side of the house, it's always an interesting position to be someone like an Inflow, right, where we have the customer base, right, and it's sort of a matter of bringing in the right partner that's going to be strategic enough to sort of handle something that an Inflow can't, right. And anytime you sort of get into that, you got the sales mindset of this is my client, right? I want to stay in control. I want to make sure that everything is being run through in the process that it should. Then you also have the technical side of the house where, it's you're letting go of quote unquote your baby a little bit here, right? And letting someone else kind of come into the fray. And what I'll say about the Observe.AI team is, everything that we've done up until this point, everything has been super transparent. And I think, transparency is a term that gets thrown around in business a lot, but I don't think it gets the notoriety or the exposure that it should, right? I think transparency is key in any aspect of business, but especially when it comes to partnerships. And I think Observe does a really, really good job of laying out that format of this is what to expect, this is how we're going to do it, these are the steps along the way, making sure that process is really understood, not just for the partner, but also for the client itself. So kudos to you guys on that again. And I may sound like I'm just, honking horns and tooting whistles, but when a good job is done, I do think credit needs to be given, and I think you guys are doing a great job in that aspect.
Awesome. We appreciate it. Thank you on behalf of our entire company.
Absolutely. Wanted to maybe take a turn into a little bit of a lighter segment of the pod. We always talk sort of what things kind of get you going in the morning, what things drive you as an individual, right? It may be I've had guests on here that are driven by family. Some are driven by their work itself. Some are fueled by the monetary gains that they see. What are things that kind of get you going in the morning? Spark your plug. What are some things that you look at as drivers in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there'd be a few, right? Some that are much more internal and specific to work, some that are a bit more external. For me, one of the biggest ones as far as Observe.AI goes, why this job, what gets me on a Tuesday morning, right, that ready to go and happy to go to work, I think a big part is going to be our team, right? Our sales engineering team at Observe is one of the closest knit teams, one of the most collaborative, communicative, just overall positive teams that I've ever been on. I've never worked on a team that really had a dynamic quite like the one that we do. And I think there's something to be said for getting up every day and knowing you have a team, you have a manager, a leader who has your back, right? So I'd really give a shout out to my manager, Christian, on that one, and really our entire team for supporting, right? And I think because that comes from the top, from him, that we all have that idea of being as helpful and being as collaborative as possible, I think is really, really important. And so it's just something I really value is whatever the company is, wherever it is that I'm working now, will work in the future, having that team component is a big one for me. I would say as far as some of the external motivations, for me, I don't think there's anything better in life than learning and improving on oneself, right? I don't know if you can see here, I can maybe tilt my webcam, but you'll see all these books and everything on the shelf. There's a lot of other things on the shelf too, like my floating plant. It's floating with magnets, but there's a whole bookshelf there. And I just love learning. And so for me, work is an opportunity to learn. Now, some things will be very much specific to that job, but other things will be just learning about interacting with people, learning about how to talk to clients, learning about how to do this job better, learning more about technology, right? All these different things to me are very, very important, and work is a great medium for that. So learning is one of my biggest passions. I also think improving on oneself is essentially the purpose of a career, right? That you're in a career to get better at it. You're in a career to get promoted. You're in a career to sell more, to be a better presenter, to communicate more effectively, all these different things. For me, work is a fantastic vehicle for that. So I love work for that. Money is great. I don't think that's what would get me up every day. I think for me, it's much more of the, how does something like a job affect my life? And the fact that I get to learn, the fact that I get to work with people who I really like, for me, that's all I could ask for.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, right? Culture is something today that means much different than it did maybe 5 years ago, even a decade ago, right? It's much more dynamic these days, and I share that same sort of gesture that you do of my managers are all, they're not just talking the talk, right? They're walking the walk. So when you have an organization that is open to new ideas, right? They're not not ones that are just in that mindset of, well, we've always done it this way, so we're going to continue to do it that way. So that's a big positive. And then two, right, you have that sort of camaraderie with your coworkers and your colleagues. We may all be remote, right, and we may not necessarily see each other maybe once a year if we're lucky, but at the same time, right, we all, making sure you're on video, right, those are like the small things. And another thing being, making sure, like you said, a new hire comes on, and you make your best effort to get that 30 minutes in with them to kind of understand them as a person, what they like, what they don't like. So those are like the small things that I would 100% agree with you on. Those make big differences as far as where people like to work, where they enjoy their time, and the companies that are maybe not doing such a great job at that, and kind of what happens to them. So that's a fantastic point. The other thing that you brought up there, and I saw the books. What's the last good book that you've read, or what are you reading today?
Oh man, there's so many good ones here. I got a few on my nightstand right here. One of my big ones that I just bought about 5 or 6 books on is sleep. I am so fascinated by all of this research that has been done on how to sleep, why people aren't sleeping as well now, what we can do to sleep better. So a lot of people think it's very scary, but my windows are all blacked out. So when you turn off all the lights, it is pitch black in here. And that's after reading a couple books about how it's actually the best sleep you're going to get is when it's totally dark. So I did a whole project a few weeks ago to black out everything in my house. So that's been a big one. I've actually been dipping into some fiction lately, which is unlike me. I'd say about 95% of the books here are everything from psychology based to some self-improvement ones to history to political things. But I have bought a few fiction ones lately. So I did start Fight Club recently, and I've seen the movie. I love it, but the book goes into a little more detail. And so that's where I am as far as the fiction goes right now. So really going back into those 80s and 90s type stories. Movies as well, that's been a big hobby, is watching some of the older movies, but I'm trying to buy the corresponding books if one does exist. So Fight Club is what's currently in progress.
Gotcha. What is there a big difference between the movie and the book as far as Fight Club goes? I know there's always that big discrepancy of people saying, "Oh, the book is better." No, the movie's better. What's your take on that?
So I don't know if I've read enough to be able to answer it. I did just finish American Psycho, which was a lot of a book. And I can tell you the movie was a lot, and the book was just a whole level of detail different. So I imagine the same is going to wind up being true with Fight Club, which is just that the story, the ultimate moral theme, all of that is going to be pretty much the same. But I think it's the detail and some of these things, that these nuanced components that you may not get in something like a 90, 100-minute movie, you're going to get a little more detail in the book. And that's just what I'm seeing initially.
Yeah, I've never believed the whole, a picture says 1,000 words. Like, I don't know. I've never really bought that. I think that, like you said, detail and words are, they paint a picture in your mind of what your mind is sort of perceiving, right? So everyone's going to have sort of a different idea of what that detail looks like. I'll tell you a story real quick about what I did back in grade school. You remember the movie or the book Holes?
Yes, with Shia LaBeouf was the movie, but yeah.
The movie, yeah. I think it was Louis Satcher was the author or something like that. Anyway, so I had a book report that was due, and being the smart aleck that I was like, you know what, we're gonna let this 2-3 weeks go by, and then come that weekend right before it's due on Monday, I'm just gonna watch the movie and do the report on that. So I went in and I did that, and I wrote the book report and I turned it in, and I get my grade back, and I got a C, right? And I was over the moon about a C, right? I was like, okay, that's 2 thumbs way up, and with the note that said, please see me after class. And I'm like, okay, this can't be good. Anyways, so I meet with her after class, and she tells me, I read your book report, and she tells me I have read the book, and I also want to let you know that I've also seen the movie. So some of the things that were in my book report, right, were left out that were not in the movie that were in the book, and vice versa. So, I always look back on that, and from that instance forward, moving, in my college years, and even when I have something for a job, or I always make sure that the material first done is whatever reading needs to be done, because I know that you can't get past, a good written piece. So I wanted to share that just because I felt like it was relevant, right? You should never just go ahead and watch the movie and then do the report itself. But Alex, I think we're here at the end of the time. I want to thank you first and foremost for making the time to speak with me today, and then also tell you that I really did enjoy the conversation. I think genuinely your insight and sort of how you view things, not just industry related but also personal, has been definitely something refreshing, and we don't really necessarily hear a ton of it from most of our guests, right? They're a lot more and I guess finished probably would be a decent word to put out there. But no offense, obviously. I'm right there in your same spot. But it's very refreshing to hear from someone that is still kind of making their way, right, and still building themselves and still kind of creating who they are, right, not just career-wise but also personal. I want to thank everyone out there that's listening to the pod. Make sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and also on LinkedIn. You can find us on every major platform that you find your podcasts. With that being said, Alex Lustig, thank you so much again, my friend. We'll speak to you soon. And for everyone else out there, have a great, safe holiday weekend, and we'll chat soon. Thanks, everybody.